my presentation is you can't iterate your way to sustainability. I'm just going to start off by saying it's no small exaggeration to say that our world's on fire. What was once the realm of disaster films is starting to become our everyday. And whilst it's an understatement to say we've had a lot to deal with over the last year, the effect that we're having on our climate hasn't stopped. Our world is changing, and it's changing in a way that disproportionately affects the most vulnerable in our society. And this means more and worse extreme weather, hurricanes, droughts, wildfires. Among the many things that this affects is the world's food supply, driving people from their homes and separating families. And this is happening on our doorstep too. In the UK, 36,000 people a year die because of long-term exposure to emissions. So yeah, last time I did this presentation, I got that told that opener was quite a lot to take in. Let's try a quick palate cleanser. Maybe next time I'll start with a delightful anecdote about my favorite movie. This might be why TED Talks don't return my emails. Are we feeling a bit better? Good. But hopefully I've got your attention. You might be thinking, well, why us? In the past, I've done this presentation to rooms of designers and stressed the importance of taking responsibility for what you design. I've shown them this quote and talked about the importance of taking action. But the thing is, it's not just designers that are responsible for how a product functions. All of us in software, product, marketing, legal, across the whole business, we determine the things that get built and why. The choices we make, the things we prioritize, can affect global systems, define cultural values, and have material impacts on the world around us. The same person who wrote that last quote also wrote this. And whilst product design as a discipline didn't exist at the time that it was written, I'm sure they wouldn't mind the editing. Because the way we build software, the way we design software is already causing harm. It causes harm to Black people, trans people, people on lower incomes. And it's not just people. When Bitcoin uses the same amount of power as a nation state, it's not hard to say that software is damaging our planet too. And this is why we need global change. We need revolutions and action. Well, the thing is that global change happens slowly. Facebook didn't start as an advertising-fueled cesspit designed to drive us apart. It took decades to change from a horny students project to what it is now. But we're not exactly blessed with an abundance of time. We may be about 10 years away from the point of no return on our climate, if not even closer. Radical, revolutionary change needs to happen quickly. And we're not alone. People are already taking action. In March of 2019, more than 1 million people gathered in 2,200 strikes organized in over 100 countries, demanding action from political and economical leaders to limit climate disaster and for the fossil fuel industry to transition to renewable energy. In September 2019, over 1,500 Amazon employees walked out of work to protest their company's environmental impact. Among their demands, they wanted Amazon to stop selling its cloud services to the oil and gas industry. In many cases, people are putting their jobs on the line to demand this change. Are we willing to take this as seriously? Okay, yay. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but I'm pretty psyched right now. So let's spin up a cross-functional group. We can order some pizza in, have a few meetings. We'll add an OKR in there somewhere between raising funnel exits and improving social login. Who knows, maybe we'll get even a few product features to meet our corporate social responsibility requirements. As flippant as that sounds, the way we've been taught as product people to tackle a new problem is to explore, learn, run experiments. At Skyscanner, I worked with an amazing team who did just that. We did our research, spoke to customers, engaged with international organizations. There's something quite terrifying about getting somebody from the UN on the line, but we did what we had to do. We worked iteratively, ran tests, identified what success would look like. But this is where revolution clashes with process. So to give you an example, let's take one of the most prominent features, showing flight emissions. On the surface, this seems like a really simple feature to launch and helps people understand the impact of their travel. But placing responsibility for sustainability in the hands of just one team meant that we weren't just dealing with our success metrics. We were playing in someone else's back garden, and companies have a process for that. We had to run the gauntlet of do no harm experiments, stakeholder meetings and reviews. Necessary? Yes, but revolutionary? No, because you don't want to risk one squad tanking your revenue figures. And because it's one squad, it's very hard for us to shout loud enough to say maybe why that's not a bad thing. Iterating your way to sustainability features is safe, and it's not likely to cause anyone any headaches. It's not revolutionary, you're not going to see it on a t-shirt, and whilst it'll avoid risk, it's not going to change the world. If your priorities as a team don't come first, you might not even be in control of what you affect. When we talk about affecting global systems, let's look at air travel. You may think about cause and effect and the invisible hand of capitalism. So we show flight emissions, people care about that. They buy flights from airlines that have lower emissions. So if an airline wants to compete, they buy lower emissions planes. Job's done. We did what we came here to do. Except purchasing decisions for aircraft take place over decades, and the main deciding factor is fuel consumption per passenger, not emissions. So we've not really affected the world with our product feature. And because getting the feature released was contingent in not reducing the number of flight conversions, we've actually put more people on planes, which increased emissions. What looked like a positive feature to release has actually had a negative impact, because getting it out there wasn't about our squad's success metrics. It wasn't about the planet. It was about getting it out the door. It was about avoiding harm to anyone else's success. Sustainability features end up becoming tacked onto the product, rather than the product or the entire business being built from the ground up to take into account sustainability. Tacked on features are pretending you can keep your existing business model and tweak it slightly to avoid having hard conversations. And this kind of pattern will play out at every company any time that sustainability comes up, because reducing our impact on the planet is risky. It's also incompatible with a company making as much money as possible. When 6 out of 1,400 employees have to fly the flag of the future, they'll struggle to be heard. You have to take risks. In 1994, someone called John Elkington coined a phrase, the triple bottom line. And the idea was that a company can be managed in a way that not only makes money, but which also improves people's lives and the planet. And the theory holds that if a firm looks at profits only, ignoring people and the planet, it can't account for the full cost of doing business. It means potentially leaving money on the table if the way you make that money comes at the expense of people or the planet. Most importantly, it puts that responsibility in the hands of every person and every team across the business. Now, I understand this is probably going to seem like a really difficult mountain to climb if you're in a large organization with only a certain sphere of influence. Or maybe you're in a smaller company where you need razor focus on just proving your proposition. Getting buy-in for a new idea is hard enough, never mind one that might need you to upend your entire business model. And this is why it's vital for all types of organization that everyone takes responsibility. So if one team fails or gets blocked or their experiments don't pan out, that can be 100% failure if it's just one team's responsibility. This might even be enough to make a company give up on the idea of sustainability. If everyone has responsibility, if everyone buys into the revolution, then even small effects can add up. So first, look at what your company does. What is your business model? How reliant are you on unsustainable practices? What tangible numbers can you put on these? And I've got to say, when saving a byte of data to the cloud uses 1,000 times the energy of saving it locally, most teams won't be able to claim complete innocence. Understanding your audience is vital. There's nothing wrong with an experiment failing to produce the result you expected. But one of the things that surprised me when I first started working on Skyscanner's green features was the gap between what people said and what they did. In interviews, we'd see a significant interest in traveling more sustainably. When you ask people to rate how they prioritize those green features over price, convenience, they were usually at the bottom of people's priorities. Nespresso has found this too, with 77% of people they surveyed claiming to recycle daily, and nearly 100% being interested in recycling. Only 44% actually recycled. So don't rely on intention alone as a way to gauge your sustainability features. Understand how your audience are prioritizing and balancing so you can respect the challenges they're already facing. People care, but sustainability can't only be a middle-class pursuit. And think radically. Push for concepts that completely reimagine your business model rather than just tweaking it. A small change can easily be handed off to one person, one small team, but a big change needs buy-in from stakeholders at all levels. As the saying goes, if you don't ask, you don't get. And by bringing in people at all levels of the business, you build up advocates for your ideas. And those advocates will keep having conversations horizontally across the business with their peers. You'll build the spirit of your revolution across the company. And finally, be willing to be obstinate. Have these hard conversations. If you're not comfortable, try to engage others as facilitators in your meetings and ask them to act as designated dissenters. Give them a role to play, pushing back on the impact of shipping more widgets or pulling more power from a data center or using more fossil fuels. And believe me, there's someone in every company who wants to go into a meeting and do just that. Anchor your strategy, not just in revenue and profit, but the wider ramifications. And in every planning meeting, ask the impact of success through the lens of people, profit, and planet. And as with any revolution, you're going to piss some people off. Maybe your colleagues, maybe your customers. At Skyscanner, we got just as many pissed off tweets about our sustainability features as good ones, including one very angry German who accused us all of being social justice warriors. But if you've got a team that's all working towards the same goal, it's a lot easier to hold the line in the face of that pissed off German person. We can decide the conversation. And from the first touch point that someone comes into our products, we can speak with one voice. And that voice can be one that changes the world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'll hand over to Meg. We've got a couple of questions coming in. Feel free to add them to the chat for Chris. But I'll hand over to Meg.
Oh yeah, thanks, Soph and Chris. What an amazing talk. Thought-provoking, I think, is probably the word that springs to mind. Okay, so yeah, Soph said pop your questions in the chat and I'll start running through them. I've had a couple come directly as well that I'll read out. So I'll start off with the ones coming into the chat from Zena. So she's asking, would you recommend that sustainability become a business level objective so the whole business takes it into account in their own team's OKRs? And what are your tips on doing that?
Okay. Yeah, I think that ties into that idea of it being top down and having it being something that gets prioritized across all levels of the company. So you don't want to walk into a discussion and have somebody say, oh, it's fine, we can ignore that. But I guess the question that I would ask is, and it maybe ties into your one around any tips in doing this, how do you make sure that it's valued just as much as making money? And I guess that there has to be somebody at the top who doesn't tolerate people just kind of ignoring it. So I think that point around trying to find concrete metrics is really important, because otherwise it's a lot harder to say, well, you know, if we do this action, we're going to have an effect on the climate, on sustainability. But then if you can't put a number on that effect, it's a lot easier to ignore. every company is going to be different. So I'm sorry that I can't give any tips around, hey, just go and do these things. Yes, good point. It's hard to get that level of objective up against revenue, but there'll always be something. And I think speaking to other people in other businesses is a really good way of finding out, what is the impact you're having. Speaking to your customers, you'll always find somebody who doesn't like your business and thinks that it's terrible. And maybe they're the best people to ask, why do you think this? So you can find if it's an environmental objection or if it's a personal one.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So a question that came in from Fabrizia, what steps are you taking at Kaluza, who are already orientated to being renewable energy, to improve sustainability?
So I'm going to have to pull possibly a bit of a mulligan on this one. I'm only about 3 months in. So right now it's presenting talks like this one internally and listening to people. Yeah, I'm trying to read a lot of books, and most of those books say shut up and listen. So most of what I'm doing is shutting up and listening to other people. That seems like a really cop-out answer. I'm sorry.
I think it's all right still to fly the I'm the new person card. So I'll let you off with that one. Knowing myself that it's a very complicated company to get involved with. Cool. I will skip on. So Kate has messaged, hey Chris, super interesting talk. For smaller companies, it can be overwhelming to think about how to build and run a company in a sustainable way. What are your suggestions for those small startups?
That is a very good question. I guess partly I don't know. I've not worked I've not worked with startups a lot, so I don't know a lot of the challenges that you're going through. I think a very lip service point that I put in there around you're having to prove your value proposition. I guess my only suggestion would be, in the same way as Twitter or any company like that, looking really honestly at the value proposition, looking at the business model, and in the same way as they probably should have asked, can this be used for harm to people? Asking, can this be used for harm to our planet? Thinking about what happens if you scale up 1,000 times. Is it possible to ameliorate the impact of your company? Is it something where you're going to challenge us eventually, or is it just that it's going to keep getting worse and snowball? I guess the question then is, if that's the case, is it the right thing to keep going with? Is it something that can be tweaked, or should you create an unsustainable company?
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Good tips to get started there at least. So a longer question coming from Sarah. So sorry, I'm gonna try and just read it out how she's written it. So how convinced are you in the concept of sustainability that infers continuing the current dominant logic of capitalism, with brackets, sorry, I know it's lunchtime, where it treats the world as a finite resource? User-centered design, our tools, our logic, our leaning to try to balance profit, people, and planet won't work. So the question is, should designers work for companies if we are only marginally improving their planet impact, or should we focus our energy on designing emergent systems that challenge our way of living, consumerism, etc.?
So I'm just going to scroll up so I can actually read the question, so I actually answer this properly. So I do totally agree with the point around the kind of dominant logic of capitalism. I mean, the whole idea that we should be buying more and creating more is just incompatible with not completely destroying our planet. Sorry, I'm just reading through things just to make sure I answer this properly. I know one of my bugbears is people who don't answer questions properly. So the point around, I guess, user-centered design and learning to balance people, profit, and planet. Well, when you say it won't work, I'd be interested to understand why it is you feel it won't work. But I guess you can't reply. So sorry, this is a really good question, and I feel like I'm only going to give an absolutely rubbish answer. Am I allowed to again pull that card of, if you want to get in touch? I'd rather discuss it than just give a really off-the-cuff answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good one that maybe you and Sarah can take a whole coffee meeting and catch up on.
Is that allowed? I know that's going to mean that we don't have the actual response on here, but
We won't set the rules for you. It might be interesting just to hear your thoughts on our question at the end about design. Should you as designers kind of only work for companies if you can only make a small impact, or should you be looking at bigger systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think that point applies not just to the planet, but also to again, I'm kind of bringing up Twitter, and I don't mean to beat on them, but companies which do things which have a negative effect on people, on our culture. I won't judge, and if somebody has to make ends meet, then I think that's a big consideration if you've got family to support, or even if you don't and you've just got yourself to support. But there is a point, I guess, where you've got to question whether you're actually making impact, I suppose, as you say. And I do think that there's a morality clause that you should probably pull and say, if a company is not actually changing, if they're not having a positive effect, and in fact, if they're actively ignoring the impact they're having, then assuming you've got the luxury of being able to quit, then maybe you do have a moral duty to do it. People like to say, oh, if we don't do it, somebody else will. But the fact is, if you're good at your job, then they'll have to hire somebody rubbish to do it. And maybe that will actually stop that impact.
Cool, thanks, Chris. We'll move on and save you the bigger questions for an offline talk there. Probably moving on to maybe a difficult question in a different way, as usual from David Hamley. He likes to send us some of the trickier ones, but he's asking, and I suppose in your opinion, how did Skyscanner balance their actions towards sustainability with the idea of flying employees all over the world into London?
Yeah, that was a question I was nervous about answering. So in my personal opinion, I mean, it's not something you can really easily defend, because again, you don't have the stats to balance that out. You can't say, oh, we did blah amount of cohesion and this raised employee whatever by this number. And that's again the difficulty of taking data to back up anything like that is, I guess if you looked at it as flying thousands of people to one location, then that is damaging. If you looked at it as, did it help all those people to align on their mission to make the world a better place? If you could put a number on that, then you could more easily answer that question. I don't think I can give a good answer, and I know David's going to castigate me for answering it in such a waffly way, but I can't answer that beyond the fact that, I mean, I don't think flying lots of people anywhere is a good idea if you're saying that you're in favor of sustainability.
Thanks, Chris. Very diplomatic and good way to answer it. Yeah, so moving on, Kevin Hall's reached out as well. Great talk, Chris. If you could work on greener choices again at Skyscanner from the start, what would you do differently? Oh,
that's a good question. I think it would be something where that team should be able to work as an advocacy team within the business and actually help every single squad to place at least one, maybe not OKR, but at least one goal or objective about sustainability. You can't build features from the ground up which are a sustainability feature. So to give an example, let's say that you're wanting to help people compare destinations, and you want to say, well, show me places that I can travel to which will be lower carbon, or show me staycation options, or that sort of thing. And that feature can't exist on its own. It can't exist as, oh, we'll just build that for green features, because that's only one dimension that people search for things. Whereas if you're building a feature for searching for destinations and green travel is one facet within that, then that's much easier to do. And for that, you need to have that cooperation. But again, prioritization process of, are we going to deliver an MVP without green features? Are we going to deliver an MVP with them but lose something else? It becomes a really hard conversation to have if you're only prioritizing, delivering that feature. Whereas if the core part of delivering it is about it being a sustainability feature, then you're going to make sure that it works properly. So actually that cooperation and embedding that thinking more horizontally within the business rather than just making it a team that had one responsibility would be the main thing.
Great, thanks. So question from Russell, what are your thoughts on B Corps as a way to bring sustainable accountability into a company's purpose and reporting?
I don't know enough about them. There was somebody else that I worked with who new lots. And I kind of did that thing of letting somebody else think about it. So I don't think I can answer that question very effectively. I'm really sorry. I'll read up on the link and actually try and be more aware of it to answer that question properly.
Looks like we're giving you lots of homework from this talk. I'm going to jump in with a question I actually have from your talk as well before. We've got a couple kind of people asking second questions there, but I have my own question that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. So you talked about the gap between users' reported intentions and the reality of their actions in your talk there, which I find super interesting. How do you recommend other people go about understanding what that gap is for their product so they can truly understand users' intent?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I'll caveat this with the fact that I'm not a user researcher, and maybe this is the point where I drop David in it and say he is an exceptionally good user researcher. But when I came into the team, we had an amazing set of user interviews that had already been conducted. What I started looking at was how do you kind of remove that the situation where somebody's speaking to another human being and they feel the need to put on to sound better than they are about things. And I had a reputation as the survey guy at Skyscanner. So for me, running surveys and trying to disguise the green aspects of it as much as possible worked out quite well. Getting people to prioritize different things rather than just asking them about sustainability, thinking about the kind of other things that they're balancing. I mean, I think about personal situations. You know, if you've got to take the recycling out and it's raining, you can have the best will in the world, but you're probably not going to do it. And it's like, you know, how much do you scale that up? So in the same way, asking questions about, well, you know, if you had a choice between, I don't know, buying a grass-fed sustainable steak or a cheap one, you're going to answer that question very differently depending on your personal circumstances. So yeah, I think that comparison part worked really well for me because it meant that I could understand a lot more about the kind of situation people had in their lives that were affecting their ability to make these choices.